When we look at a map of Europe from 1,000 years ago, we find something extraordinary. Of the 45 European countries that exist today, only 7 or 8 were around back then. Hungary is one of those 7. It's a nation that multiple empires have tried to conquer and assimilate throughout the centuries. First came the Holy Roman Empire, which sought to bring these lands under its rule. Then the Mongols arrived from the eastern steppes, destroying everything in their path. The Ottoman Empire conquered much of Hungarian territory for a century and a half. The Habsburgs ruled the kingdom for centuries, trying to Germanize the population. Hitler's Third Reich occupied the nation during World War II, and more recently, the Soviet Union imposed its system through decades of oppression. But here's the question we need to ask. Where are those empires now? They've all risen and fallen, turned into historical footnotes. Meanwhile, Hungary has persisted as a nation in the heart of Europe for 11 full centuries. How did this nation manage to resist despite its distinctive ethnicity and frequent encirclement by hostile empires? Where did its strength to resist conquerors come from? And how was it able to rise after every defeat while preserving its language, its distinctive European culture, and its unwavering commitment to freedom across the ages? To answer these questions, we need to travel 1,100 years back in time. We need to understand who the Hungarians really were before arriving in Europe, and we need to follow their extraordinary migration from the depths of Asia to the heart of the European continent. Because what you'll discover about this people's origins will challenge everything you thought you knew about European history. For the past 11 centuries, Hungarian history has unfolded in a territory that Hungarians call the Carpathian Basin. Otto of Freising, a medieval German writer, described this region with words that reveal its magnificence. This country, surrounded by mountains and forests, was long ago called Pannonia. So pleasant and beautiful is its nature, and so rich is its land that it's almost like God's paradise. The description wasn't exaggerated. The Carpathian Basin represents one of the most fertile and strategically valuable territories in all of Europe. Surrounded by the Carpathian Mountains to the east and south, the Alps to the west, and the Bohemian Hills to the north, the region forms a natural fortress. At its center stretches the Great Hungarian Plain, a vast territory of farmland known as the breadbasket of Central Europe. The Danube River flows through this basin, providing abundant water, transportation, and trade. During the Roman Empire, the western part of the Carpathian Basin was known as Pannonia, a Roman province of great strategic importance. For 4 centuries, the empire's frontier ran along the Danube River. Pannonia's role was crucial, protecting Italy against incursions from Germanic tribes pressing from the north. That's why Rome built military bases, fortifications, and settlements all along the Danubian frontier. Cities like Aquincum, modern-day Budapest, Carnuntum, and Sirmium became thriving military and commercial centers. Roman legions patrolled the Danube's banks, keeping barbarians at bay. The decline of Roman Pannonia came as a result of centuries of Germanic migration. Gothic tribes during the 3rd century began pressing harder and harder on imperial frontiers. Eventually, the Huns' assault during the 5th century put an end to Roman rule in the Carpathian Basin. Tradition holds that the center of Attila the Hun's empire was located on the Great Hungarian Plain, and that it was here where the great conqueror would ultimately meet his end, dying under mysterious circumstances on his wedding night. The centuries following the Roman Empire's fall saw several different groups of people arrive in multiple waves of migration. These included the Gepids, a Germanic people who established a short-lived kingdom. Then came the Lombards, another Germanic people, who later migrated to Italy. Later appeared the Turkic Avars along with Slavic peoples who began populating the region. The Avars, a nomadic people from the Asian steppes, established a powerful khaganate that dominated the basin for over 2 centuries. But all these peoples were just a prelude.
because in the 9th century, a people until then unknown to Europeans arrived from the east. Contemporary writers didn't know who they really were. They called them Turks, Huns, Hungarians, or Avars, but they called themselves something else: Magyars. Who were the Magyars? Where exactly did they come from? Were they descendants of Attila's Huns? And how did they manage to establish themselves in the land that remains their homeland to this day? Despite decades of ongoing research, there's still no consensus on these fundamental questions. Theories about the prehistoric Magyars are debated all across Hungary today. From serious historical institutes to local bars, Hungarians passionately discuss their origins. The main reason for this ongoing controversy is devastatingly simple: the almost total absence of written records from the early periods of Hungarian history. The oldest known Hungarian chronicles date from the 13th century. That means they were written 300 years after the conquest of the Carpathian Basin. 300 years of history transmitted only orally through generations of bards and storytellers. 300 years during which facts got mixed with legends, real events with heroic myths. While some Persian, Arabic, Byzantine, and Western European sources from the 9th and 10th centuries offer clues that historians believe might refer to the Magyars, these sources are riddled with uncertainties and contradictions. Arab writers confused them with other nomadic steppe peoples. Byzantine chroniclers provided descriptions that didn't always match each other. Western sources, written by monks who'd never seen the Magyars directly, reproduced rumors and exaggerations. Consequently, our knowledge about the Hungarian people's origins and their migration is limited. It rests mainly on conjecture and circumstantial evidence. We don't have documents written by the Magyars themselves during their migration period. We don't have contemporary inscriptions describing their exploits. We don't have first-hand accounts from their leaders explaining where they came from or why they were migrating. This documentary void represents one of the greatest enigmas of medieval European history. How can a people who established a lasting kingdom in the heart of Europe almost completely lack written records about their own origins? The answer is that the Magyars, like many nomadic steppe peoples, didn't develop a tradition of historical writing until after their Christianization. Their history was preserved orally, transmitted through generations of bards and storytellers. But oral tradition is fragile. It transforms with each telling. It gets mixed with legends and myths. And eventually, when it's put in writing centuries later, it becomes almost impossible to separate historical fact from legendary fiction. However, modern historians haven't given up. They've found other ways to track this mysterious people's origins, methods that go beyond written documents.
Unable to rely on written sources, historians have been trying to reconstruct the early history of the Hungarians based on results from multiple scientific disciplines. Linguistics has provided crucial clues. Archaeology has unearthed material evidence of their migrations. Ethnography has identified cultural patterns that survived through the centuries. Anthropology has studied their physical characteristics and social practices. And more recently, archaeogenetics has begun revealing secrets hidden in modern Hungarians' DNA. Each of these disciplines provides a piece of the puzzle. Together, they're starting to form a coherent, though still incomplete, picture of who the Magyars really were. The linguistic evidence is particularly revealing. We know with certainty that Hungarian is a member of the Uralic or Finno-Ugric language family. This means it shares linguistic roots with Finnish and Estonian languages. This connection is based on their similar grammatical structure and shared basic vocabulary. Hungarian words for numbers, seasons, body parts, and even the most commonly used verbs all reveal Ugric origins. This is evidence that can't be ignored or disputed. The fundamental structure of the Hungarian language demonstrates beyond doubt a connection with the Finno-Ugric peoples of Northern Europe and the Urals. Although these modern languages share common roots, they sound very different today. A Hungarian speaker and a Finnish speaker would only understand each other if they spoke English.
That's because the shared vocabulary of the two languages has undergone significant transformation. The transformation goes way beyond the average person's ability to identify any relationship between the words. Who'd believe that the Hungarian word három and the Finnish kolme, both meaning three, are related? Or that the Hungarian word for boy, fiú, and the Finnish poika come from the same ancestral linguistic root? Yet linguists can trace these connections through systematic laws of sound change. They can demonstrate how sounds transformed during centuries of separation. They can reconstruct the Proto-Uralic language both peoples spoke thousands of years ago. This linguistic evidence tells us something fundamental. The ancestors of the Hungarians lived at some point in the same region as the ancestors of Finns and Estonians. They shared a common language, they shared a common culture, and then at some point in prehistory, they separated. The ancestors of Finns and Estonians stayed in the north, the ancestors of the Hungarians migrated south and east toward the vast steppes of Eurasia. There, their language began transforming. There, their culture began changing. And there, they began encountering other peoples who would leave indelible marks on their identity. Because what happened next would enormously complicate the enigma of Hungarian identity. The Magyars didn't remain isolated on the steppes. They mixed with very different peoples, adopting elements that would make them seem completely different from their Finnish cousins in the north. If this investigation into a European people's mysterious origins is fascinating you, hit that subscribe button, because what's coming reveals how the Hungarians became a unique blend of European and Asian influences that no other European people can claim.
A considerable amount of evidence also suggests the possible Turkic origin of the Hungarian people. And this is where the story gets enormously complicated. Because if the Hungarians are linguistically Finno-Ugric, how can they also be Turkic? Archaeological discoveries and foreigners' accounts of the conquering Magyars describe them as a nomadic or semi-nomadic Turkic people arriving on horseback. Byzantine and Arab chronicles from the 10th century refer to the Hungarians as Turks or Turkic peoples, not as Finno-Ugrians, not as relatives of the Finns, but as Turks of the steppes, indistinguishable from other nomadic peoples who'd terrorized sedentary civilizations for centuries. Moreover, the basic vocabulary of the Hungarian language contains numerous words with Turkic roots. Words related to warfare, horsemanship, administration, and social organization. These aren't superficial borrowings taken through trade, they're fundamental words suggesting deep and prolonged contact with Turkic peoples. The runic script of the steppes, which the Szekely Hungarians of Transylvania preserved for centuries, serves as additional evidence of Turkic influence on Hungarian culture. This script, known as Robashiras, is clearly related to ancient Turkic scripts used by other steppe peoples. Archaeologists have found artifacts showing designs typical of nomadic Turkic cultures. Weapons, horse harnesses, jewelry, and clothing items all reflect the aesthetics and craftsmanship of Turkic steppe peoples. The burial practices of the early Magyars also reveal Turkic influences. They buried their warriors with horses, weapons, and valuables, following the customs of Central Asian nomadic peoples. So, what were the Hungarians really? A Finno-Ugric people who adopted Turkic culture? Or a Turkic people who retained a Finno-Ugric language? The answer is more complex than either of these two simple options. But the confusion about Hungarian identity doesn't end here. There's a third theory that has captured the imagination of generations of Hungarians and foreigners alike. The association of Hungarians with the Huns is a common perception held by many people around the world. The Magyars arrived in the Carpathian Basin in the 9th and 10th centuries. Their violent raids into Western Europe generated comparisons with the terrifying figure of Attila the Hun and his ruthless warriors. They came from the east like the Huns. Their way of life, their clothing, their pagan religion were similar. And above all, their mastery of mounted archery and their merciless attacks were reminiscent of the Huns in the minds of pious monastic historians.
Western Europeans, terrified by these new invaders, simply assumed they were the Huns returning after 5 centuries. Therefore, medieval Hungarian chroniclers assumed the two peoples were one and the same, or were very closely related. The 13th century chronicler Simon of Keza recounts a legend about the Hungarian people's origin that deliberately merges Huns and Magyars. According to his account, 2 brothers named Hunor and Magor followed a deer to their new homeland on the coast of the Sea of Azov.
And the Huns, or Hungarians, descended from them, Keza wrote. By Hungarians, Keza meant Magyars. The 14th century illuminated chronicle went even further. It considered the Huns' campaigns during the 5th century as the first Magyar invasion of Europe. It incorporated the Huns' past into Magyar history, describing Attila the Hun as a Magyar king. This fusion of identities wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate decision by medieval chroniclers who wanted to provide the Hungarian nation with a glorious and ancient lineage. They wanted to connect their people with history's most famous European conquerors. They wanted to demonstrate that the Hungarians had dominated these lands not once, but twice. As late as the 19th century, the idea of a Hun-Magyar kinship was widely accepted among Hungarians. They remained proud of their world-conquering ancestors. Attila became a national hero, a symbol of Hungarian power. His name was given to children, monuments were erected in his honor, epic poems were written celebrating his exploits. However, modern historiography and linguistics have called the Hun origin theory into question. No convincing evidence of a direct connection has been found. The Huns' language, to the extent it can be reconstructed from a few words preserved in Greek and Latin sources, shows no similarity to Hungarian. Even the Latin name for Hungary, Hungaria, refers to the Onagers, a Turkic people, often confused with the Magyars, not to the Huns. The English word Hungarian derives from Onagor, not from Hun. However, there's some merit left to the theory. After Attila's empire dissolved, the Huns migrated eastward, most likely to the region of present-day Ukraine. Here they mixed with various groups, potentially including the Magyars' ancestors. It's possible, even probable, that some Hunnic elements were incorporated into the Magyar tribes during the migration period. In the 20th century, the cult of the Hun king was reflected mainly in the baptism of many children named Attila. Today, if we meet someone named Attila anywhere in the world, it's reasonable to assume they're Hungarian. The name has become a marker of Hungarian identity regardless of any real historical connection to the Huns. So after examining all this contradictory evidence, what can we conclude? The Hungarians are Finno-Ugric people by their language. They're a people deeply influenced by Turkic cultures in their way of life, military organization, and craftsmanship. And they've adopted elements of Hunnic mythology into their national identity. They are, in other words, a people of multiple and complex origins, a people forged on the steppes through centuries of migration, mixing, and adaptation. But this blend of identities wasn't a passive process. It was the result of centuries of migration across the vast steppes of Eurasia, where the Magyars interacted, fought, and mixed with dozens of other peoples. When we look more closely at the Magyars during the 9th and 10th centuries, we can see their ethnic origins were quite diverse. Due to the long migration period of centuries, various ethnic groups separated from or joined the Magyar tribes, resulting in constant changes. This ethnic fluidity was characteristic of all nomadic steppe peoples. Tribes weren't pure and stable ethnic units. They were political confederations that could absorb entire groups of other ethnicities. A captured warrior could become a full tribe member. A family seeking protection could be adopted into the clan. Entire groups could switch allegiances, bringing their own traditions and languages with them. In the 6th century, the Magyars lived on the steppes between the Volga River regions and the Urals in a territory known as Magna Hungaria, or Greater Hungary. This was their ancestral homeland, the place where they consolidated as a distinctive people. Their way of life was primarily nomadic or semi-nomadic. They raised livestock, mainly horses, sheep, and cattle. They lived in large tents and yurts, portable structures they could dismantle and transport when the tribe moved.
But they also practiced agriculture to some extent, cultivating millet and other grains when conditions allowed. This combination of nomadic herding and limited agriculture made them more flexible than purely pastoral nomads. Sometimes the nomadic way of life made migration necessary. When environmental conditions were unfavorable, when drought dried the grasslands, when winters were exceptionally harsh, tribes had to move in search of new pastures. When the threat of foreign invasion loomed, when more powerful enemies pressed on their territory, migration became a matter of survival. Some groups headed west, seeking the richer lands near Europe. Others remained in Magna Hungaria, preserving the ancestral lands. In the year 1236, 7 centuries after the conquest of the Carpathian Basin, the Dominican friar Julian undertook an extraordinary expedition. He traveled eastward, following ancient trade routes and asking about peoples who spoke a language similar to Hungarian. And he found them. Julian found the Magyars who'd remained in the east, still living in Magna Hungaria near the Volga River. He discovered he could communicate with them, that their language was mutually intelligible with Hungarian. These were the descendants of those who hadn't migrated west. Some groups had headed south, with Magyars residing in the Caucasus region for several centuries. They left their mark on place names and in the region's people's traditions. However, the ancestors of those living in Hungary today migrated west toward the destiny that would make them Europeans.
At the beginning of the 9th century, the Magyar tribes migrated to the region between the Dnieper River and the Carpathians, known as Etelkez, or land between rivers. According to Muslim and Byzantine sources, they are a people with tents and yurts, and they follow the rains and grassy places. Wherever they travel, they carry their belongings, their tents, and their animals with them. A Persian source described the Magyars more favorably. They are beautiful people of good appearance. Their clothes are of silk brocade, and their weapons are of silver and inlaid with gold. It also noted they weren't averse to attacking neighboring nations. According to the same source, they are always defeating the Slavs and Russians, who are chained in rows and kept as their captives. Raids against sedentary neighbors were an established part of the steppe economy. Nomads traded when possible, but raided when necessary or convenient. It was in Etelkez that the Magyar tribes took the crucial step that would transform them from a loose tribal confederation into a unified nation. The chroniclers recorded the founding of the first Hungarian state in Etelkez and the blood oath made by the chiefs of the 7 Magyar tribes. This blood oath was a foundational event of enormous symbolic importance. Following ancient steppe custom, each tribal chief would spill his blood into a vessel filled with wine. They dipped their weapons into the mixture, symbolically uniting their military power. And then each would drink from the vessel, sealing their mutual commitment with a sacred oath. They chose Chief Olmos as their grand prince, the supreme leader of all tribes, and they swore that their chief and those of his descendants would always come from Olmos's tribe. This oath wasn't a simple political formality. It was a binding social contract that established the principles of Hungarian monarchy for centuries. The descendants of the 7 tribal chiefs remained faithful to their pact. For almost 5 centuries, the princes and kings of Hungarians came from Olmos's lineage. This dynastic continuity provided political stability and legitimacy to Hungarian rulers. The chroniclers considered Olmos a descendant of Attila, deliberately linking the new nation with the glorious Hunnic past. His name means dream, which the chronicler explained with his miraculous conception. According to the story, he was named Olmos due to a divine and miraculous event. In his mother's dream, while she was pregnant, a divine vision appeared in the form of a turtle bird, and, as if descending upon her, the bird impregnated her. Then she had the impression that a fountain would spring from her womb and that glorious kings would descend from the fruit of her womb. Olmos and the royal descendants of his son Arpad belonged to the Turul clan, named after an unspecified bird of prey. The Turul became the symbol of the Magyars after the Middle Ages, particularly from the 19th century onward.
The bird's figure is found on numerous statues and monuments throughout Hungary. One still extends its wings protectively over the Hungarian capital from the top of the Royal Palace Hill in Buda. The turul represents the dynasty's divine connection, celestial protection over the Hungarian nation. It became a symbol of national identity, of Hungarian pride and manifest destiny. With the blood oath sealed and tribal unity established under Almos, the Magyars were ready for their final destiny. But what was coming wouldn't be easy. The conquest of their new homeland would require not only courage, but also a series of decisive battles that would determine whether the Hungarians would have a permanent home or be swept from history. Smash that subscribe button if the formation of this unique nation is fascinating you, because the conquest that's coming next was one of the most dramatic events in medieval Europe, and it changed the balance of power on the continent forever.
According to tradition, the Magyars arrived in the Carpathian Basin in the year 896 under Grand Prince Arpad's leadership, son of Almos, through the Vereke Pass. But reality was more complex than the traditional narrative. Contemporary historians suggest the conquest occurred in waves over several years. The Magyars may have arrived decades earlier, participating in skirmishes between the region's neighboring powers. It may have taken them several years to enter the Carpathian Basin through the mountain passes of Transylvania. The migration wasn't a single dramatic event, but a gradual process of infiltration, exploration, and finally, permanent settlement. Although Almos was still alive at the time, the battles marking the conquest are more closely associated with Arpad's name. The exact circumstances of the leadership change from Almos to Arpad remain mysterious. Some sources suggest Almos was ritually sacrificed before entering the Carpathian Basin. This practice, though brutal to the modern mindset, had precedence in steppe cultures. It was believed that sacrificing the previous leader would ensure the new enterprise's success. His blood would consecrate the new land. His spirit would protect the tribes in their new home. In artwork commemorating the conquest, it's Arpad who's typically depicted. He appears at the head of the 7 tribal chiefs riding in the monument at Heroes Square in Budapest. He can also be seen in Mihaly Munkacshi's painting in the Hungarian parliament and in Arpad Festi's monumental 1,800-meter-long painting of the conquest, which is one of the world's largest paintings. These artistic representations aren't simply decorative, they're visual assertions of national identity, constant reminders of the Hungarian nation's foundational event. The conquest of the Carpathian Basin was a rapid series of events that resembled a settlement process more than a violent conquest. During this period, the region's states were notably weak. The East Franks were distracted by internal conflicts. The Bavarians couldn't organize effective resistance. The Slavs were divided into small principalities without military cohesion. And the Avars, the previous dominant power, had been destroyed decades earlier by Charlemagne's campaigns. Avar power had been completely broken, leaving a power vacuum in the Carpathian Basin. There was no significant military force that could oppose the well-organized, war-experienced Magyar tribes. The East Franks, Bavarians, Slavs, and Avar remnants didn't offer much resistance. Although the Trans-Danubian region was nominally under the control of the East Frankish kingdom, this control was more theoretical than real. A considerable Hungarian-speaking population had already established itself in the Carpathian Basin before Arpad's arrival. These might have been Magyars who arrived in earlier waves, explorers, traders, or groups that had separated from the main tribes. Considering the large scale of the historical skunk,
The circumstances of the conquest, farmer agriculture and animal husbandry were less affected in the Carpathian Basin during this period than in the Roman-era hinterlands. The Avars had no reason to change the traditional practices of the region's peoples. A large part of the indigenous population still resided in the region after the Magyar conquest and contributed to the formation of the new Hungarian nation.
Or they might have been Magyars, the Turkic people who gave Hungaria its name, and who may have been ethnically related to the Magyars. This made the region easier to conquer, since they didn't consider the Magyars under Arpad as total foreigners. Some scholars support the double conquest theory, which posits that the Magyars who arrived in the 7th century were partially or completely Magyar. According to this theory, what we call the conquest of 896 was actually the second wave of Magyar settlement. However, this theory can't be directly proven, like many other theories about the early Hungarians. It remains in the realm of academic speculation, debated but not confirmed. One legend associated with the conquest account is that of the White Horse. This legend, preserved in medieval chronicles, illustrates the Magyars' cunning and their determination to claim the Carpathian Basin. According to the story, Prince Arpad sent emissaries to Moravian Prince Svatopluk, who controlled part of the Carpathian Basin. The emissaries presented him with a white horse with a golden harness, and in exchange they asked for land, grass, and water, an apparently modest request. Svatopluk, assuming they were requesting permission to settle temporarily as herders, granted their petition. He thought he was doing a minor favor to a group of nomads who needed pasture for their flocks. The Magyars soon came to appreciate the fertile land, abundant grass, and clear water of the Danube region. They carefully assessed the territory, identifying the best locations for permanent settlements. Subsequently, Arpad sent a message to Svatopluk ordering him to leave immediately. The message contained a bold declaration. The Slavic ruler had sold his entire country to the Magyars for a white horse, a golden saddle, and a bridle. By accepting the gift and granting land, grass, and water, Svatopluk, according to steppe law, had transferred ownership of the entire territory. The logic was relentless. The land produces grass, grass needs water, water covers all the land. Therefore, by granting grass and water, Svatopluk had granted the land itself. This legendary story may not be historically accurate in its details, but it captures an important truth about the conquest. The Magyar used both diplomacy and military force. They exploited divisions among local powers. They made alliances when convenient, attacked when necessary. And once they'd established themselves, they had no intention of leaving. However, not everything was diplomatic negotiation and peaceful settlement. There was resistance, there were battles, and there was a decisive confrontation that would determine whether the Magyars would remain in the Carpathian Basin or be driven back to the steppes. The Battle of Pressburg in the year 907 marked the conquest's end and the permanent establishment of the Hungarians in Central Europe. Bavarian Margrave Luitpold and his allies had a clear objective: expel the Magyars from the Transdanubian region. They gathered a considerable army of Bavarians, East Franks, and Slavic allies. It was a formidable force, the largest that had been organized against the Magyars up to that point. They marched confidently into Magyar territory, expecting the nomads to flee before their superior power. But they were decisively defeated by the Hungarians. The battle was a massacre. The Magyars used their steppe tactics with devastating effectiveness. They feigned retreat, drawing the Bavarian army into a vulnerable position. Then their light cavalry attacked from multiple directions. Their mounted archers launched clouds of arrows while maintaining distance. When the Bavarian army tried to form defensive lines, the Magyar cavalry simply rode away, shooting backward as they retreated. When the Bavarians pursued, they fell into prepared ambushes. The heavy Bavarian infantry, loaded with armor, couldn't catch the agile Magyar riders. Their heavy cavalry was too slow to catch the steppe horses. By day's end, the Bavarian army had been destroyed.
Margrave Luitpold lay dead on the battlefield alongside most of his nobility. The triumph at the Battle of Pressburg was so overwhelming that no significant threat from the west would affect the Hungarian Principality for over a century. Europe was forced to accept a new reality. The Carpathian Basin had new inhabitants and new rulers. The Magyars had come to stay. But victory at Pressburg was just a beginning. The Hungarians wouldn't be content with simply defending their new home. For the next several decades, they'd launch devastating raids deep into Western Europe, terrorizing Christian kingdoms from Italy to France, from Germany to Byzantium.
After victory at Pressburg, the Hungarians became the scourge of Western Europe for over half a century. Between 907 and 955, they launched countless raids into Christian territories. These weren't simply opportunistic plundering. They were carefully planned military campaigns that penetrated hundreds of kilometers into enemy territory. They reached northern Italy, where they sacked monasteries and cities. They went as far as Burgundy and Provence in what's now France. They crossed the Alps on expeditions that left European chroniclers astounded. How could these pagan barbarians cross mountains considered insurmountable natural barriers? They attacked German territory repeatedly, burning cities and capturing thousands of prisoners. They even reached the Atlantic coasts on expeditions that reached Spain. European chroniclers described them with the same terror they'd felt before the Huns. "The Hungarian people, more savage than any wild beast," wrote a German monk. Another chronicler called them the scourge of God, the same term used for Attila centuries earlier. They prayed for protection from the arrows of the Hungarians, "Deliver us, Lord." This prayer was incorporated into liturgies of churches throughout Western Europe. The terror they inspired was so great that their mere approach caused panic. Cities paid tribute to avoid attack. Kings negotiated treaties acknowledging Hungarian power. And for decades, no European army could effectively stop them. But this raiding period couldn't last forever. Victory at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, where King Otto I of Germany decisively defeated a Hungarian army, marked the end of the raiding era. The Hungarians were forced to recognize they couldn't continue as plundering nomads in the heart of Europe. They had to choose: integrate into the European community of Christian nations or face destruction. They chose integration. The Christianization of Hungary under King Stephen I, István I, in the year 1000 completely transformed the nation. From a feared pagan raiding people, they became a respected Christian kingdom. From nomadic steppe warriors, they transformed into a sedentary European nation. But they retained crucial elements of their original identity. They retained their unique language. They retained their sense of being different from the people surrounding them. And they retained their fierceness, their determination to resist foreign conquest. This combination of adaptability and persistent identity is what allowed Hungary to survive for the next 1,000 years, resisting all empires that tried to absorb it.
We return now to our original question. How did Hungary survive when so many empires fell? The answer lies in the story we've just traveled through. The Hungarians are a people forged by centuries of migration and adaptation. They learned to survive on the harsh steppes of Eurasia, where only the strongest and most adaptable thrived. They absorbed influences from multiple cultures: Finno-Ugric, Turkic, Hunnic, Slavic, but they never lost their core identity. When they conquered the Carpathian Basin in the 9th century, they weren't simply looking for new territory to plunder. They were looking for a permanent home. And once they found it, they defended it with fierce determination. The Holy Roman Empire tried to conquer them in the 10th century. They failed. The Mongols devastated Hungary in the 13th century, destroying much of the country. But Hungary rebuilt itself. The Ottoman Empire occupied much of Hungarian territory for 150 years in the 16th and 17th centuries. But the Hungarians never stopped resisting. And when the Ottomans finally withdrew, Hungary would rise again. The Habsburgs ruled Hungary for centuries, trying to Germanize the population. But the Hungarian language survived. Hungarian identity survived. Hitler occupied Hungary during World War II. The Soviet Union imposed communism for decades. But in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, Hungary was one of the first nations to break free. Today, Hungary remains as a proud nation in the heart of Europe. Its unique language continues to be spoken by millions, its distinctive culture flourishes, and its commitment to freedom, forged on the steppes over 1,000 years ago, remains unshakable. The empires that tried to conquer Hungary have become footnotes in history books. But Hungary endures, a testament to the resilience of a people who traveled thousands of kilometers from the depths of Asia to find their home in Europe. A people who never forgot who they were, no matter how many tried to make them forget.
Today's Hungarians are direct descendants of those steppe riders who crossed the Carpathian Mountains over 1,000 years ago. They preserve the memory of Arpad and the 7 tribal chiefs. They preserve the symbol of the Turul, the mythical bird representing their divine destiny. And they preserve something more important than any symbol or legend. They preserve the spirit of a people who never accepted permanent defeat, who always rose after every fall, who never forgot their language, their culture, and their identity. In the heart of Europe, surrounded by larger and more powerful nations, Hungary has endured for 11 centuries. Not because it was the militarily strongest, not because it was the economically wealthiest, but because its people never forgot who they were. Next time you hear the Hungarian language, remember you're hearing an echo of the ancient steppes of Asia. Next time you see the symbol of the Turul on a Hungarian monument, remember it represents an epic migration across thousands of kilometers. And next time someone asks you how a small nation could survive when massive empires fell, tell them the story of the Magyars, the story of a people who found their home and decided that no empire, however powerful, would ever take it from them. That's the true conquest of the Hungarians, not the conquest of the Carpathian Basin in 896, but the conquest of time itself, persisting when all others fell.
If this story about a nation's extraordinary resilience through 11 centuries has inspired you, drop a like and hit that subscribe button. Because every week I explore the stories of peoples and civilizations that defied the odds and changed the course of history.